Welcome back to another episode of Geomancy, where we look at the past to see ahead. We looked last week at the layout and placement of buildings in Philadelphia, and we're going to be following that up today. Little deeper dive into some history plus some interesting things that I found. So if you watched last video, I talked about cities being electrical. Look at any city or town layout from above and it looks just like a circuit board. And I think because they are circuit boards, they're living circuit boards. I also then went into showing how Philadelphia appears to be laid out based on the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life. And I then went into these locations and made the connection between the Tree of Life and what I found. Number 9, the ninth Sephira was St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. This building right here, foundation. You can see it definitely is representing foundation. And I made note of how it looks like these 7 buildings that I found worldwide that I talked about in my second video. Well, while doing various research on Philadelphia and City Hall, I came across this website, the Bright Bill Postcard Collection, which has all these different postcards featuring images of old buildings in Philadelphia. Some of them are still standing, many are not. But one building in particular caught my eye. This building right here. And it looks just like these other 7 buildings worldwide. It's speaking the same language. So I wanted to find a little bit more about that building. And this is what I found. It is the Spring Garden branch of the Philadelphia Public Library. There are all kinds of buildings of the public library across the city, many in old world buildings that seem to be repurposed. So here's the history behind this. Opened November 18th, 1907, in a new building given by Mr. Andrew Carnegie, erected on land presented to the city by the Baldwin Locomotive Works, Burnham, Williams and Company. So, remember that name, Baldwin Locomotive Works, because they had something to do with another building before. But you can see in this image, this library, it has all of the features of a reset building. We've got a couple people standing around who look like they had nothing to do with it. The building looks old, and from this angle you can see there's some kind of mud flooding going on, with the front being higher than the back and stairwells leading down half a flight. That's a common feature if you're familiar with this type of research. But here's another image, and this is said to have been in 1907 when it opened. Does this look like a new building freshly opened? Absolutely not. This looks like it was there for some period of time. The least they could have done was power wash the steps and made us believe, but you can see that it's speaking the same language. So why is it notable that Andrew Carnegie had anything to do with this building? Well, if you don't know about this man, he is what I like to call a reset baron. He was born at this time where he inherited a whole lot. And one thing I believe he inherited was this 2,500 libraries built in a 46-year period that he was said to have donated the funds to. And you can see some of these examples below. They're all over the world. It's worth taking at least 5 minutes out of your day and reading about some of these libraries, because they're going to blow your mind, and you're going to ask, how is it possible that in New Zealand, for example, he could have built that, or Oklahoma, or it doesn't really matter. The list of them is mind-boggling, and they all speak reset. So anyway, we've got this connection between Mr. Carnegie and the Baldwin Locomotive Works. Well, in my previous video, 2 videos ago, I say how this building, Converse Hall in Utah, has a similar connection to the Baldwin Locomotive Works. The funds for this building were said to have been donated by the president of that company, John Converse. Here we have Baldwin Locomotive Works, and I don't have time to get into that company. I think they may be a reset company who took over a lot of technology from the past civilization that was already here. But this gentleman's donating money and having something to do with a building in Utah and this building here in Philadelphia. I don't know. I mean, what do you think? Do you think this is the kind of thing you got to dive into with this research, is see the connections and the inconsistencies? And I don't think they built either of those buildings. And you can tell by looking at the images. So let's get back into Philadelphia and learn a little bit more about the history. I already talked about how City Hall is the soul of the city and perhaps the soul of the old world. But what do we know about this building and the city? So I showed some images of it allegedly being constructed. I say putting the roof on because, the foundation and everything was already there. It looks like they just put the roof on. Although this photo does tell otherwise, if it is an accurate image. But in my research this week, I came across this old map of southeastern Pennsylvania. And this is a pretty spectacular map because it's very detailed, it's relatively accurate, and it's got a lot of information. One of the things that it has is that we've got the names of all the people who were the original purchasers. And William Penn had this map created in 1681, right? 1681, this map was said to have been created. So keep that in mind. If you look way at the bottom along the Delaware River, you'll see Philadelphia there, and I blew it up so you can see the scale and actual depiction. But if you look at the city of Philadelphia, it is clearly a city. I mean, for 1681, I know this is just a simple rendition of a map. It's not like Google Earth or anything, but that is a city, 100%. It's gridded, it's laid out. Even City Hall and the squares, the parks, they're all there. So I wondered what happens when you overlay that map that I drew on top of it. And we can see it lines up the same. And you'll see even still how close the planning and the grid of the city actually is. Now, one thing that I think is interesting with this map is you'll notice on different plots of land, we have different symbols. Some look like X's and O's. It's almost like tic-tac-toe or something. Some look like hieroglyphs. But I think the surveyor's job was to go out and see what was remaining in the city, what there was. I don't think a couple hundred pilgrims would have been able to do this in the amount of time that we're told. And so High Street is now Market Street, but Broad Street is still Broad Street. By the way, High Street, that's a common street name that you can find worldwide, and I think it's all have to do with resets. So who is this guy William Penn that had this map created? Well, he's the guy that is standing casually at the top of City Hall. And he wrote this journal to the Society of Free Traders, which are a group of, his homies, so to speak, basically documenting his findings in the quote-unquote New World. And I highlighted this one section in particular because he describes the people. And if you already watched a couple of my videos, one of the themes is that I believe a lot of the original inhabitants worldwide were people that look like myself. And this is backed up through a lot of historical evidence in writing, iconography, crests, symbols, all kinds of things. But this is his description on the natives. He says, "The natives I shall consider in their persons, language, manners, religion, and government, with my sense of their original. For their persons, they are generally tall, straight, well built, and of singular proportion. They tread strong and clever, and mostly walk with a lofty chin. Of complexion black, but by design, as the gypsies in England. They grease themselves with bear's fat clarified, and using no defense against sun or weather, their skins must needs be swarthy. Their eye is little and black, not unlike a straight-looked few. The thick lip and flat nose, so frequent with the East Indians and blacks, are not common to them. For I have seen as comely European-like faces among them of both, as on your side of the sea. And truly an Italian complexion has not much more of the white, and the noses of several of them have as much as of the Roman." So in this piece, he's describing the people, and he's basically saying they're black, they're swarthy, they grease themselves with bear's fat, so they put lotion on, they're black. I mean, there's no denying that. But what he's saying is that by design, as the gypsies in England, he's saying phenotypically, they look more like the gypsies in England, not like the Indians or the blacks. The East Indians and blacks. Now, why is it notable that he says the gypsies in England? Well, again, if you watched a previous video of mine, I mentioned about the Jacobite rebellion of these black people getting kicked out of England after the overthrow of the House of Stuart. So there were black people all over the world with different phenotypes. And if you look at black people today, you can see that. So anyway, that's what he says. But who's another person that is a founder of, a lot of things who has something interesting to say? Well, Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States. And he wrote this very interesting essay in 1751 called Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind. Ben Franklin was a Philadelphia, he's like the Philadelphia homeboy kinda. Revered and everything is Franklin this and that. But he says some very interesting things in this essay, and it's rather long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I do recommend it, and I'll link it in the description, and this is what this guy wrote. So let's see what he has to say at the end. He's basically talking about what needs to happen to people the world. This is why it's called Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind, right? And he makes some interesting things, so I'm going to read this. "And since detachments of English from Britain sent to America will have their places at home so soon supplied and increase so largely here, why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements, and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? Which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionately very small. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, who with the English make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. I could wish their numbers were increased, and while we are, as I may call it, scouring our planet by clearing America of woods, and so making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light to the eyes of inhabitants in Mars or Venus, why should we, in sight of superior beings, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity, by excluding all blacks and tawnies, of increasing the lovely white and red? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. So we could spend a long time decoding that like we're in history class or whatever. But some things that are interesting is he makes note of the people of the world. He says there aren't that many white people in the world relative to everyone else. That's something that we don't even think about. We assume, if you go to school or whatever, you assume everyone's white and, somebody like me is a minority, but that's not the case. So his concern is growing the white race. That's that in his words, essentially. He talks about the Palatine Boers. So I had to do a little research because I wasn't familiar with that term. As it turns out, the Palatines are the citizens and princes of the Palatinates, which were regions controlled by the Holy Roman Emperor. I talked in my very first video about the Holy Roman Empire, and if you see this young gentleman, this brother right here, on the lower right, that's Saint Maurice. He was this patron saint of the entire Holy Roman Empire, revered. Now, my question is, why aren't we taught that they have saints like this at any time in history? It would be helpful to know. But I also showed this image, St. Maurice and his companions. So in Germany, when Ben Franklin is talking about the swarthy Germans, I think this is who he's talking about. Because the Germans, the Swedes, these are people that were already in the quote-unquote New World, setting up colonies and getting things going. I think it was these people. In Philadelphia, and I don't mean exactly those people, but them and their kin. In Philadelphia, there are two areas that have German descent. There's Frankfurt and then there's Germantown. And both of these areas have all kinds of amazing architecture, that really doesn't make sense for pilgrims, settlers, colonies, any of that stuff. It's the same kind of architecture you'd find anywhere. But it does mention here that this land was established by the Quakers in 1682, but the area was already occupied by Swedes and Germans. So Ben Franklin in 1751, so that's about 70 years later, after this area was occupied, he's still concerned about these swarthy Swedes and Germans in different parts of Philadelphia. There's also Germantown. And again, these places have amazing architecture. I think they have something to do with the people that were already here before William Penn sent his surveyors out and before all that stuff happened. And one of the things about Philadelphia that is very notable is you have all kinds of reset architecture, different time periods, things that I think may have happened thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago. Certainly not in the amount of time that we were told it was possible. An example is, that mansion right there, Clivenden. But all over the city, you see different kinds of time periods of architecture. So, this right here, I don't think that these types of buildings that we see all over the place were built at the same time. I think many resets have happened, and Philadelphia was a heart of whatever was going on. We're not really sure, but we know it was important. We know if a city is based around the tree of life, it's got to have some significance, not even just locally, but globally. And there was a World's Fair in Philly, which I'll do another video on. But on the left, you see this image of Memorial Hall in Fairmount Park, Philadelphia, sometime around or after the World's Fair. And on the right, this is an image I took. I found this older photo pretty recent, but it's amazing when, things line up like this. So that's pretty much all I have today. Philadelphia, amazing city, worth checking out, worth learning about, because you'll find dots that connect all over the globe. And it's pretty special. So I just want to show you, I did a drive-by the other day, saw this amazing building, and I had to just capture it briefly. And you can see it's really unbelievable, and this doesn't do it justice. But so on my way out of Philadelphia, actually, I drove past the Museum of the American Revolution and noticed this. And I had never seen this man before, never heard of the Forten family. And I wondered, like, what is this about? Black founders. Well, it seems like it's something that ties into what I'm researching and what I've been feeling for a while. But who knew that there were black founding fathers of the United States? I think that throws a whole wrench into the narrative that we've been taught. And I'm going to check out this exhibit and see what it has to say. I'm expecting, for the most part, narrative compliant history. But knowing everything I've been researching and what I'm after, I think we'll be able to find some major clues. Do note this depiction that they chose of him and what it looks like. It looks like a Moor's head. It looks like the same thing that I've been talking about. And, even the same thing as my logo. So thank you for watching. I enjoy making these. Give me suggestions on things you want to see me research. If you want me to cover anything deeper, happy to. Have a good one. Stay blessed.